Let's know about what are services in Angular and why do we need them. So before we studied about how we can transfer the data between parent component and the child component. What if the relationship between these components is not a parent and a child relationship? Then what? How can we share data between parallel components? There, the services comes in picture. So now let's see how we can transfer data first and then we'll know how we can generate a service and use services in Angular. Let's go back to our code and let's generate a new component so that we have two components and then we can try sharing the data between them. I'll go to my terminal and here to generate a new component, the command was ng, then generate. In short, we can just write G, then C for component, then the name of the component. Maybe in our case, our first component was named first, second can be second. Hit enter. The Angular will generate new files. As we can see, it has created 4 files and we can see here there's a new folder in green. It is second. We have all the 4 files: CSS, HTML, TypeScript, and the spec TypeScript. So this is our second component. Let's go to second component.ts file, and this is the class, and this is the selector. Let's copy this and add our selector to app.component.html, or the you can say the parent HTML. Let's write in h2 that it is a second component, and below this we can add our HTML selector and save it. Let's see what is inside our second.html component. It is a paragraph which says second works. Let's go back to our page and see if our page is still working. We can see within our second component, the second works is being displayed. So whatever is in before this h2 heading, which is second component, is from the first component, and below this is from second component. Let's try to share some data and let's try to create this data in our first component.ts file. Let's say we can create a new employee list, which we can imagine as it is of all the information about our employees of our organization is being saved inside. So we can say employee, and this is equals to objects where it can be name is equals to boss, then age is maybe 21, then salary we can say some zeros. Similarly, let's add another one, and another one. We can say employee 1, employee 2, employee 3, age is 22. Then this can be 23, this can be 24. We can reduce 1 zeros. So this is our employee list and it contains the data for the employees of our organization. Let's try to print this in our HTML. We can use the ng for to iterate over the employee and we can print them one by one. So we create a new division and we use the ng for directive, and this is equals to let e of employee and within this division we can add just a paragraph, then use interpolation to use this e variable dot name to access the name of our employee. Let's save this and see if it's working. Here we can see the name of the employees are being printed as we expected. Now, how can we transfer the same list to our second component? What if we write the same thing in our second component .html file right here? This will not work because in its constructor there is, as you can see, we are getting an error because we don't have employee in the second component class. We don't have anything here. The list does not exist. So this is where we need the services who can transfer the data. But you can say we can do just copy paste here. We can just copy our data and we can place it inside our second component and it will work. We can see the whole information. But this violates our do not copy code protocol. Right now we have a very small data. What if this is about millions and millions of data points? Then copying and pasting it in another file is not an option. That's why we need something which can replace this, and this is where the services comes in picture. We can directly go into the implementation of services, but it's always better to understand how the things work before actually making use of them. So how does the services transfer the data between these two component classes? So it uses something called dependency injection. Dependency injection is a framework, or you can say is a method of doing or making or sharing a data between the classes. Let's write some code in a normal TypeScript file to understand what are dependency injection and how an Angular provides that framework which where we can use services to transfer the data. So I'll create a new file and let's call it demo.ts and let's try to create a car. Every car needs engine and tires. So engine and tires are the dependencies of this class car. So let's write our class of engine. We can leave it blank for now with a blank constructor. Similarly, we can create a class of tire. Similarly, we can create a car, but car needs engine and tire as a property because the car is dependent on these two things to actually get completed. Now let's call, let's assign this engine and tires as a engine and tires type. We can say this engine is equals to, we use the new keyword to specify to make an object of type engine. Similarly, we can say for tires, So every car is dependent on the engine and tire class. That's why engine and tires are the dependencies of the car class. Right now, all the things will work perfectly fine. But later on, if someone updates the engine and now engine needs some parameters while defining, then we get an error because we don't have that parameter inside our constructor here, and we cannot transfer all the parameters back while defining our car class. That will just create a mess, and we will have to change the code everywhere in wherever we wherever the dependencies are. So we'll always have to track the dependencies of things, and if they get changed, then we need to change our whole code. So the better way to do this is using a dependency injection. How we can do that? So rather than creating a new object here, we pass an objects inside the constructor only. We can say we are providing an engine and tires as an object inside our constructor. And here we are just assigning them and creating an instance and saving it inside our car class. This is of type tire engine and this is of type tires. So now if I give some parameter to this engine, the car class will not show any problem because the engine and tires are the objects which we are injecting. So this is the dependency injection. We are injecting the dependency. So whenever there's a change in engine, only the engine class will be dealt with. We need not to worry about all the other parts of the code and all the dependencies of the wherever the engine is the dependency of the other class. So Angular provides a framework which handles all of this thing in background, and we just use services and we create a method inside these services and we can use them inside different components. So finally, now we can start with generating services. So finally, now let's start with generating services. And to do that, we'll open our terminal and here we'll write ng, G for generate, S for services, and now the name of service. We can call it employee. Hit enter and you can see it created two files, employee.service.ts. This is what we want and it's right inside our app folder. We have employee service.ts. This is our service. Now note that to start with services, don't forget to include it in app.module. To include it, we go to the providers and add the class here. Let's copy our class name, which is employee service. Then in app module, we paste it. And at the time of pasting your class name, don't forget to import it too, or you can directly click on the one with some extra text at the end so that it gets imported automatically. So here's the services, employee services from employee.service. Let's save this file and go back to our employee services.ts. Here we'll create a method. We can call it get employee. This method, and inside this method, we can return our object, which was the list. So let's copy our data. So let's copy our list, which contains all these objects, and paste it in our employee get employee method. So whenever this for this method get employee will be called upon the object of employee service, it will return the list of our data. Now let's go to our components and try to access this. Let's go to our first component.ts file. Here, let's delete this and just make it an array. And let's copy this, and we need to go to the constructor. Let's scroll over. Now let's define it just above the constructor so that we can look at the same time. Inside our constructor, we need to call the employee services here. We can use a shorter form to create a variable at the same time of uh, calling it. We can use private keyword, then a variable name, maybe employee service. And this is the of type employee services. Click on the one with some extra added text at the end so that it gets imported automatically. You can see it gets imported automatically. Now use the ng on it method of this component class, and here we'll use this dot employee is actually equals to this private variable, which was employee serve. Then we'll call the method get employee, and this dot employee service. So now after defining the employee to be of type any, we can pass this data, the array, to our employee property. Now let's go back into our second component.html, sorry, the second component.ts file, and do the same. We say, let's create, let's copy paste our code here. So we had this. Let's copy paste the exact thing in our second component.ts. And here it's not imported, so let's call it again so it gets imported again in our second component. Now let's go back to our page and let's see are our result displaying. So we can see we gave the data only once in the services class, but we are calling the data in two different components which are parallel to each other. The first folder and the second folder are not inside each other, they are in parallel. So they don't have a relationship of parent or child. So they are parallel components, and still we can send the data in between these two components from service class. Let's have a small review and we'll go back to our slide. So the first thing which we did was we used the command line interface which says ng generate serve, then the service, then the service name. In our case, we had employee. You can also use the shorter form which says ng, g for generate, s for service, and then the name of the employee, and then the name of the service. Then we also need to register this service in the app module.ts file. There in the providers, we gave the name of the class of the service class and also imported it at the same time. Then we went to the constructor of our components, and there we used this type of way of calling a variable, which was we used a private keyword, then a local variable name, then we typed with a colon after that the class name. So this variable name which we gave also became a property at the same time. Then because this property was private and we need to use a public property to display content on the HTML, we go on to ng on init method, and there we gave an employee list equals to this variable, and then we call the method get employee, which resulted in giving us the list of data. And in the HTML, we had ng_for, which iterated over this list and printed the data. So this is how one service data was shared between two different components.